Hey, Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast. And in ninth grade, I had hair so long that I was mistaken for a girl. Often. All right, so let's get into today's interview.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to interviewing world-class photographers to ask them the questions you want answered. Whether you want to be the world's best wedding photographer, family photographer, pet photographer, or you just want to take better photos of your kids growing up, we will get you to start taking better photos today. Here with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodgers fan, and award-winning Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me this week on the Beginner Photography Podcast. I am Raymond, your host. I'm also a wedding photographer in Indianapolis, and I love my job. I love my job. Very recently, I had a January wedding. It was January 27th, and it was a winter wedding, and the bride specifically picked January 27th. I want to share this story real quick because she loves snow. She really wanted snowy photos, and it rained all day. There was no snow left on the ground. It was warm, relatively. It was like in the 40s, but there was no snow. And you could see that she was kind of visibly upset, which made me kind of upset too, because I'm invested in my couples and I want them to have an amazing wedding experience. And for her, it's not what she imagined. So it was kind of up to me to kind of boost her spirits, to keep things going. And it can be tough, it can be very tough. But my point of the story is that, even though it's a wedding and even though it's a couple who is super fun and they love, being together, and they just like show off all this love that they have for each other, and the photos turn out great, sometimes it takes work that's not photography related to make sure that your clients are happy, keeping the mood up, trying to cheat things that you can, put them in special rooms, just go above and beyond, because I knew that she wasn't going to be, I knew that there weren't going to be any snowy photos since it wasn't snowing. So it was my job to really try to create something for her that was unique and didn't matter whether or not it was snowing. I really want her to have a photo that she'll look back at 10 years from now or 20 years from now and think like, man, this was an awesome story from my wedding day. And that's what I had to do. So just a fun little story about that. Well, before we get into today's interview, I wanted to highlight a review that we got, and it's wonderful. It brings a tear to my heart. It's very short, sweet, and to the point. So this interview comes from Tara. She says, "I really enjoy the podcast. The length is perfect. As a mom, I can get in a quick listen during a nap or lunch cleanup, and I really appreciate that. Super helpful and informative. Awesome interviews, and I especially love the down-to-earth, no question is too dumb feel to Raymond. He's extremely relatable. Very well done." Tara, thank you so much for that awesome iTunes 5-star review. Your feedback to me is what keeps me going. I'm being totally honest here. I feel sometimes that I'm talking to my computer and I'm just looking at myself, and then I edit up these podcasts and I'm staring at myself, and then I just kind of put it out into the world, and then that's it. So hearing your feedback, knowing that there's somebody on the other side listening and truly enjoying and getting value out of what I'm creating here, essentially, really does mean the world to me. Every single review is like, it's like, I hate to say that it's like oxygen, that it's blood, but I truly like want to do better. With every review that comes in, it makes me want to work harder and better, just bring you better content so that I work hard for that 5-star review. So again, Tara, thank you so much for that. So if you're listening to this podcast right now, right at this moment, and let's say that you're on, I don't know, an iPhone, or you're at your computer and you have iTunes in front of you like you would if you were on your iPhone, you would be doing me the biggest, I don't want to say it's a favor because I don't want you to feel obligated to do it. I would be so incredibly grateful if you took the time out of your busy day right now. I understand podcasts help you kind of get through the busy periods. I would be so appreciative if you took 2 minutes and just wrote a review for the podcast within iTunes. It really helps with our rankings and help me, I guess, get found by more people. And when there's more listeners, guests oftentimes look at that. So the more listeners that we have, the more 5-star reviews that guests can see our dedicated fans, the more willing they are to come on and share their great information that they have. So I'd be so appreciative if you were able to leave a review. I was going to say a 5-star review, but I don't even just want a 5-star review. I want you to be open and honest. Seriously, if there's something that I'm doing wrong, let me know in a review. I would love to make this a great podcast for each and every one of you. Thank you. That's it. We're going to go ahead and get on into today's episode. It is with for the past month or so, I've been trying to diversify the guests that we have to share more experience that isn't, since I'm a wedding photographer, I like talking to other wedding photographers. But oftentimes I know that you are not a wedding photographer and maybe you want to listen to something more specific about your area of expertise. But today's guest is a wedding photographer and she shares a ton that isn't just about wedding photography. So I really think that no matter what genre it is that you're listening or that you practice, if you're listening to this, you're going to get value out of this because it's all about delivering a really good experience to your clients and giving them something memorable that they're going to hold on to forever. She shares some great examples that I cannot wait for you to hear. But first, I wanted to say that the guest is Allie Siarto, and she is also a host of the Photo Field Notes podcast, and it is more of a business podcast for wedding and portrait photographers. So if you're listening to this, granted, if you listen to this episode, it isn't just for wedding and portrait photographers, it's for any type of photographer. But if you are a wedding and portrait photographer and you're interested in potentially growing a business, starting a business, Allie has on her website Photo Field Notes podcast, which you can just Google. It'll take you right to the website. She has a mini 3-day course called The 3 Key Steps to a 6-Figure Photography Business. And I checked it out. I signed up for it because I want to know who my guests are before I bring them on. I really want to, I don't want to show up blind, essentially. So I took the course. It's 3 days. She sends you a new video every day. They're 30 minutes long. She delivers an hour and a half of free content directly in your inbox, and it's like video walkthroughs. It is a great course, and I highly suggest if you are thinking of starting a business, maybe even way in the future, today's not the day, definitely in the future, still check out this course because there's a lot of key principles to having a successful photography business that you should know now. Go check it out at the Photo Field Notes podcast website. Again, her course is 3 Key Steps to a 6-Figure Photography Business. And personally, once again, I enjoyed the course. I got good information out of it. And in fact, I even changed some of my email templates based on her recommendations. And I've already seen an improvement in response, which is everything, essentially. So I really have to thank Allie. Okay, if you're interested, check it out. But right now, we're going to get into her episode with Allie Siarto. Today's guest is Allie Siarto, a wedding and lifestyle photographer currently in East Lansing, Michigan. She is also the host of the Photo Field Notes podcast, where she focuses on business growth by interviewing other successful photographers. Allie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Raymond, for having me today.
Sure. I mentioned earlier in the intro that you're currently in Michigan, but you have this beautiful video on your website that adds so much personality to you and your family. But can you let the listeners who haven't watched the video, let them know where you came before and how you got into photography?
Yes. Oh gosh. Yeah. So in terms of location wise, I've been kind of all over the place. So actually I'm from Michigan, born and raised in Michigan, went to Michigan State University, graduated from Michigan State with a degree in advertising, and at the time it was called telecommunications. So digital media, which just barely touched on photography, like 3-point lighting, basic stuff, but it was not what I had in mind. I actually wanted to go work for a big advertising agency. And so when I graduated, my big plan was to move to New York City and work for a big ad agency. And my last few months of my senior year, I started dating my now husband, and he was actually in the master's program at Michigan State and would be for another year. So I was like, New York sounds a little bit far away, but Chicago, it's 4 hours from where I am. So I ended up working for a company in Chicago, working in the digital PR department there. And while I was there, there's so many winding stories. So again, photography was not a thing that I wanted to do. So I was working this really entry-level job, living in Chicago, had no money whatsoever, had no life beyond my job. And one day I was just I need a creative outlet. I need a community outside of work. And so I found this class at the Chicago Photography Center, which was a nonprofit, and it doesn't exist anymore, which just really breaks my heart because it was the greatest organization. And so they basically they're buy this exact camera, everybody buy a Nikon D90. That was where they started because it was an affordable entry level camera that let us all learn the basics. Everybody buy a 50 millimeter 1.8 lens because it's a good starting lens. So that's what I started with. And I just went to these in-person classes twice a week. We would go and we would learn the basics, and we would do assignments, and we would have lab time, and we could print out our photos and be like, wow, look at that. And it all started in black and white. So we didn't even start with color. We just learned the basics. And then I think when I really love something, I go all in on it. So I remember starting out, I would print out my photos from my assignments, and it would be these specific assignments take a picture showing motion, or take a picture within your block that tells a story, whatever it was. And so I'd walk around Chicago, I'd take these pictures, I would print them out, and then they would end up in my cubicle, my beautiful cubicle decorating things. And people would walk by and they'd be like, oh, cool, did you take those? And I'd be like, oh, yes, I did. And before I knew it, a couple people, there were about 500 people at this company, and a couple of them, I can't even remember how exactly I'd made that leap where they were like, well, hey, can I hire you for photos? And I was like, sure, you can pay me $80 or $100. And I
just
remember
pulling
going,
that number out of the air, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Right.
No, I had a full-time job.
Yeah.
I mean, again, not that I was making a ton of money doing it, but I was fine. And I remember going to photograph these people who I worked with and being just terrified because one was my boss. I was I can't screw this up. And he knew it, So I just kind of slowly got into it from there. And then I continued down the path of my career for many years. I started my own company in kind of the PR digital space, market research space that I did for many years, and was actually pretty well known in that space. That was considered my success. And so I felt like leaving that behind was going to be a failure. If that was success, then leaving it would be failure. So basically running in tandem, I was running this other company and growing this company and really focused on that. And then photography was always I always call it my alter ego on the weekend, where I would go. And so I called up a photographer and I said, I looked on the Knot. And I think I looked at the first person who came up in the featured listing, and I called him and I was like, hey, can I be your assistant?
Oh,
and
wow.
He actually said yeah, come on in and we'll talk. So I went in and I did a trial, a free, an audition. So I went to a wedding. I was just carrying bags for him and taking some photos. And then he hired me on. He paid me $100 per wedding to help out and a lot of assisting with carrying bags. That was my main job. And then I was actually hired as an employee so I could use his lighting. So he would give me lighting gear and taught me lighting, and he would sit down with me after every wedding and help me go through my photos and teach me what I needed to know. And that was huge. That was so helpful. Yeah. I didn't even realize how great that was at the time, that no one gets that. I was like, yeah, I'm not getting paid a ton, but the experience was everything. So I remember someone when I was in college saying, treat your first few years out of college as just a continuation of your education. Just treat it like you're still learning. Don't get stuck in the muck where you're like, oh, I'm not making enough money, or you're feeling like you're not moving fast enough. Just if you have the mentality that is a time to learn, then it can be a much more positive experience. So I think I took it that way, and I really got a lot out of it.
I mean, that's a great mindset to have, for sure. Like you said, there's a lot of people coming out of college assuming, like, now I know all this stuff, I have a lot of debt, I have to be making a lot of money.
Yeah.
But
and
going the route you did sounds
Yeah.
way more fulfilling, especially
Yeah,
like
and
later on down the road.
and we don't know everything coming, whether you go to college or not. Like, come on, we don't know everything. So
Right.
it's good to take the time and like appreciate that you can learn from others. So anyway, so let's see, I'll try not to make the story too long. So I ended up, after I got married, I moved back to Michigan. So I had worked for that photographer, learned a ton, moved back to Michigan, and still was running my other company, and I could run it from anywhere. So we were like, let's go back to Michigan. That's where our family is. My sister had my nephew by then. I felt like we were just too far away.
Mm-hmm.
So we got back to Michigan. We kept the company going. I was starting to grow the photography company in Michigan. And then we decided kind of like on a whim to move to DC for like 8 or 9 months. Just kind of like, you know what? Actually, first, no, we bought a house. We bought a house, and then we decided to move. So we had to like leave our house, leave our cat. We couldn't take our cat with us. Yeah, So
you really do jump into something when you fall passionate about it, don't you?
It was truly like this like
insane.
split-second decision. We were in DC, and a friend we had met was like, hey, let me show you this place. My friend who owns it is only home once a month for one night, and he wants someone to rent it for really cheap. And we were like, we can't pass this deal up. So
Wow.
we signed like a 9-month lease, and we were just like, let's just treat it like study abroad, and we're going to go and enjoy it. So actually at that time, I had decided that I was going to go all in on my other company. And I actually took a year off of photography, and I thought I was going to be done. Because I had shot, I think, 17 weddings the year before while running the company.
As an assistant?
No, as myself.
Your own weddings? Oh,
yeah,
my
once
gosh.
I was back. It took a couple of years back in Michigan. I shot 17 weddings. I was running the other company, and it just something had to give. So I was like, I'm just going to give up photography. I can't do everything. I love it, but like I was like, the money's not going to be there. The other places where I'm getting the money. So whatever. So yeah, I think I was still kind of learning the business side at that point. So I thought I was going to be done forever. I was in DC. I was saying no to absolutely everything because I was in DC.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day somebody called me, and it was like the mother of the bride, and just kind of out of the blue, she was so excited. She was like, is this Allie Siarto? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, are you available for my daughter's wedding on this date? She loves you. And I was like, oh, well then maybe yes. And she was like, we'll take you. Yeah. And so she like got me kind of back in the like excitement of everything. And so I took just 2 weddings that fall. And then from there I was like, oh, I do really love this. And so with all of that, my daughter was born later that fall. And just kind of evaluating everything, I realized that if I was going to spend time doing something, I wanted it to be something that I loved. And so photography won in the end. And now I am a full-time photographer, and I built my team from there. And now I live back in the house that we bought. We've been here for a while. And yeah, I've continued to just grow the business in Michigan.
Wow. Okay. So that was quite a road to where you are now.
That's a short story too.
Okay, hold on. Let me break this apart real quick. Okay. So, we'll start back when you first called the other photographer to assist him, right? So, at this point, how much had you learned from the school that you were going to learning photography? Were you proficient in a camera, or was this still like going to be additional education in terms of simple settings?
I was about as proficient as an assistant can be, but not enough to like shoot my own. So I had taken basically the beginner class, the like more advanced class, and then I had taken a flash class, so I knew how flash worked. I understood the mechanics of it, but I hadn't done off-camera lighting, so he really taught me everything with lighting in that way. I had never photographed a wedding, so no, that's not true. I had like kind of photographed my friend's wedding that I was in, that was one of those like she wouldn't have otherwise had a photographer.
Sure.
So like, but those were exactly what you would expect them to be.
Real quick, do you still have those photos somewhere?
Oh, I think I found a couple on Flickr recently.
Oh, sweet.
And I was doing like the like really texturized editing and like lots of editing.
Contrast and saturation. Oh, yeah. Vignetting, I'm sure.
Yeah, sepia vignetting, all that fun stuff. So, so I was like, basically where you would expect an assistant, a not yet second shooter, but like assistant who also can have the camera. So I was great for carrying bags, right? And then if I got a great shot, great. If I didn't, it didn't really matter, basically, at that point.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So when you went into it, did you think that you would be learning more than just the technicals of photography? Were you looking forward to opening up your own photography studio one day? Or I'm just trying to get in that mindset of why you contacted this photographer.
Yeah, I think I was. I still, like I said, at this point in my career, I had no intention of doing it to the full time, to the extent that like it would become the only thing I did. I always thought that my other company was always going to be the dominating company. But
so was
still
this
something,
just a creative outlet for you?
It was
To
a little
carry
bit more than
bags?
that.
Oh, okay.
No, it was something more than that. I think it was that drive where I was like, I want to be really good at this. Like, I want to be able to have that fulfilling feeling of taking amazing photos for someone for their wedding. And it was just so different. I was working in corporate America with these global companies, and it was just so different to work one-on-one with clients. And I loved it. And I just got addicted, basically. I was like, I must do more.
Right.
And I didn't want to do more and like do it kind of like halfway, I guess. I really wanted to be as good as I could be at it.
Sure. No, I totally understand that. As another wedding photographer, that's what I love most, is the personal connection that you have with somebody, the amount of time that you spend with them to get to know them so that you can personalize, essentially, the photos that you can deliver to them to see their reaction, as opposed to I worked for a public company before I started working in photography, and it's like whenever I did something that I was proud of, it just kind of went into the white noise because I never saw the end result of it. So I 100% understand.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt at my other company. Like it was just kind of like, was like, there it was. Nobody was really appreciative, but to actually have people like cry or get so excited and to really truly thank me was really fulfilling and just like creatively fulfilling for me. For sure.
Okay, so you met this new photographer, you became their assistant, you started working, and you started shooting a little bit. What are some things that you learned that had nothing to do with the camera, essentially, and working just one-on-one with a client?
Yeah, well, everything about planning, basically, realizing he was really organized, and he would have a sheet that he would give me before every wedding that had the family list already put together, and he'd have like these circles and family trees of who's who, and I can't remember if it was like symbols, or he would tell me if there was an awkward relationship to be aware of, and the whole day would be planned, and the way he interacted, and he would tell me stories about how, there was this one bridal party where he worked with one bride, and then the bridal party loved him, and then they all hired him along the way, and that led to many other weddings, and how important that was. And he had a dress code. I had to wear a very specific thing when I showed up. I had to look very professional. The appearance really mattered. These were really high-end weddings in Chicago that we were going to. Just the way that you behaved in front of clients, everything about it. That, I had worked, like I said, I worked in corporate America, so I knew how to conduct myself in front of people. I was going to be professional, but it's still really different, and kind of just balancing the party aspect with the professionalism and the lighting and the just everything happening at once. But the logistics, I think that if I had gone and photographed a wedding on my own without having ever worked for somebody else, I wouldn't have had nearly the preparation to just know how the day was going to go. Like, okay, like typically this is after this, and then this will happen. These are the things to look out for. This is where things can go wrong. Just everything that prepared me to be the best that I could be.
Okay, so now, obviously, you do still want to be professional. First of all, it's still going through my mind how crazy it is that this guy shooting very high-end weddings in Chicago was like, on a whim, oh yeah, you've never shot a wedding? Come on, like, let's come in.
Well, like I said, it was because he had a very strategic approach to it. And actually, I feel bad because I ended up leaving Chicago after that. And Andre, I'm really sorry if you ever listen to this. I'm sorry that I left, but and I'm now in this mindset. So he wanted me to start out as an assistant, and he wanted to train me from the ground up. So what he did was he would train people from the early stages. If he saw something in them where he knew that he could he wouldn't have a lot of risk because I was the third shooter. I wasn't even the second shooter. I was like the third shooter. Okay. So there wasn't a lot of risk. He wanted to train me from the ground up to then become his second shooter, to then become like, let's say like an associate photographer. Gotcha. It was within a bigger company. And now I'm taking on that mindset. So just yesterday, I talked to somebody who is a student, a photography student. To be quite honest, I have never seen her work before. I've never seen a single photo she's taken, but I'm going to hire her to be an assistant to help with bags and, you know, pay her to come along and help. And then if she wants to take some photos, she can take some photos. I'll give her some feedback. And ideally, because I know her as a person, and that was what mattered more, was personality. Like, I wanted someone with the right personality.
Of course.
And then I assume she's got some skills, and I can train the rest into her if she's interested. So then I can get her to the point where she's interested in the other pieces if she wants to become a second photographer and then potentially an associate photographer. So I like the mindset of being able to bring somebody in from the beginning, and I think that is what he does. And then, you know, sadly I left and I kind of wasted his time. So I do feel bad about that, but I didn't plan to move. I thought I'd be in Chicago for the whole time and work my way through the company. It just didn't work out that way.
Well, I mean, that's life. You've been bouncing around a lot, obviously. So trying to find the spot where you feel most comfortable, and here you are now. So it's very important. I want to hear a little bit about the first time you booked your own first wedding. How did that come about? Did you have a website at this point? Was it, I mean, like after the, like you said, you had the friend whose wedding you were in, and if you didn't shoot it, then they just weren't going to have any photos. I want to hear a little bit about the first paying client that you had.
I think I maybe had just launched a website that was really basic, thinking that down the road I would start to try to market myself for weddings. And I was at a barbecue with a friend. And so she was Mormon and had a bunch of Mormon friends who were getting like in that age of getting married. Mm-hmm. And she had a friend who I'd never met before who was at the barbecue. And so we're at this like downtown rooftop barbecue, and she was just like, oh, I'm getting married. And we're just chatting. Oh, I'm getting married in 3 weeks. I don't have a photographer yet. It's kind of like we're kind of putting it together quickly. And I was like, well, I'm a photographer. Like, I just kind of like threw it out there, like, whatever, let's do it. And one of the things with being an assistant, as I was taking these photos, I did not have the rights to any of my photos. I could not use them in my portfolio. So I don't even remember what I showed her. Maybe like the other wedding or my photography assignments. I cannot remember. No. I had done some portraits at that point, so I would have shown her the portraits. And I was very honest with her. This is my first wedding by myself, besides like the friend one, and I have worked with, but I've worked on these big weddings where I was doing a lot of shooting. I do feel confident. I know my lighting, and I charged her $500 like we all do, right, on our first wedding. And it was like, 2 or 3 weeks later, and here's the best part. So it was a Mormon wedding, so I wasn't even allowed to go into the Mormon temple. Yeah. So, but she had converted, so they had like another ceremony later because the friends and family couldn't either. So it was fine. So I showed up at like 8 a.m. They came out, they were married. We took pictures in like this full sun. I dragged my husband along to be my assistant. And I remember being like, I know you don't want to take photos in full sun. Like, I know you have to diffuse it. So Jeff, you're going to hold my like reflector, like just as we're going to take the thing off and hold it up above. And we're going to try to get them in the shadow. And then I'm going to try to just get them there, and it's going to be great. And it was like, it was not great, but it was fine. I mean, it was better than full sun. Like I knew the basics of what I was doing. I thought I actually think I did a pretty good job overall. Like I knew that they didn't want to be in full sun. I created shade for them. It just wasn't very big shade. And then I did know, like I knew how to use my lighting. I had my flash and my umbrella. It was a big dark room. Like you never could have done it without lighting. So I was like, I was pretty proud of my lighting, but I did not bring enough batteries. So I'm sitting here charging batteries on my like quick charger in the middle of dinner. I didn't know to ask to be fed. So they had this amazing spread of food that we totally could have had some. And Jeff's like, Allie, I'm starving. And I was like, I don't think we can eat it because I didn't ask. Yeah. So all I had to do was ask. And I'm sure she like ahead of time, obviously. And I'm sure it would have been like, now I put it in my contract. Everybody feeds me, but I didn't know. And I was starving, and Jeff was like, I'm never doing this again if you don't feed me.
Oh no.
But from that, so I got just enough photos from that event. It was it turned out to be a really amazing venue, like a great venue in Chicago. And they had gotten a deal on it, I think, because they had their wedding. It was like an afternoon wedding. And I So I had work from this great venue. I remember like this one particular ring photo that I took that was really cool. And like that ring photo alone, I was like, this makes me a professional. And then I like used that to book other clients. So after that, once I had my own portfolio work, I then actually pretty quickly after that, I put an ad up on the Knot. And I think later that fall, I knew I was going to be moving to Michigan. So I paid for an ad in Chicago and in Michigan and booked my first couple weddings in both places.
Oh, wow.
So when I moved to Michigan, I actually kind of came back and forth. Or maybe I knew I would eventually, whatever it was, I ended up getting a couple weddings in both places. And went back to Chicago a couple times, did a couple weddings there, and just kind of like slow grow from there.
So obviously, like, you started advertising on the Knot in both Michigan and Chicago, which blows my mind. That's insane to be in both places. But now that you have shot a few weddings, what sorts of things are you doing for these clients in order to help, I guess, gain referrals? Because we all know how important referrals are.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it took me a while to really get there where I was creating the full experience. But I want to tell you a story that's going to seem unrelated, and then you'll see how it's related.
I'm excited.
Okay. So this is actually a story about my mom. So it has nothing to do with photography, but it's going to illustrate to you like why you'll get it when I tell it. So,
Okay.
So hanging with me here. So my mom went out to the West Coast with her sister and her mom to visit family, and they went wine tasting. So while they were wine tasting, they went to this vineyard and they were given this glass of wine, and they said, oh, go out on the hill and enjoy the beautiful setting and just enjoy the wine. So they're sitting on this amazing hill, looking over this gorgeous setting under this tree in the perfect sunny weather, and they're with amazing company. They're having the best time. And my mom is drinking this wine, and she says, this is the best wine I've ever tasted. This is so good. So she goes back in and she says, I've got to buy some wine. I have to bring this home so everybody can experience how amazing this wine is. And so she buys it, and she goes through the hassle of packaging it up and taking it home and, getting it there. So a couple months later, my mom and my dad host a wine tasting party. And it's not just a wine tasting party, it's a blind wine tasting party. So they put all the wines in like paper bags so that nobody can tell what brand it is, so that you're not influenced by knowing the brand or like the pretty label or anything. It's just like totally based on taste. So they pour the wine. Everybody ranks the wine. They decide what tastes the best, purely on taste. They rank them 1 through whatever, 10. I don't know how much wine they're drinking. Right, I guess that's a lot. So at the end of the day, every single person, including my mom, ranked that wine dead last. He said it was awful. And she was like, it was crazy because when I was sitting on this beautiful hill, sitting with amazing company in a beautiful setting, under the sunlight with a beautiful view, it tasted amazing. Mm-hmm. And when I was just tasting that wine back at home with no other context, it was awful.
Yeah.
So how does that apply to our clients? So another story I'll tell you, just kind of also relating it back to photography. So I had a session in December. It was an extended family session. And we planned it ahead of time, knowing it was going to be cold and still planning to do it outside. And I figured, okay, we'll get that like really pretty light. Everybody will be bundled up, but like cute and styled. And we'll have mittens and hats, and it'll be really cute. And then the contact person emailed me and was like, listen, we just don't want to do it outside. It's going to be like, we're going to have younger kids. We don't want to.
Yeah.
And she was like, can you give me recommendations on where to do it inside? And I don't have a studio. I used to have a small studio, but now I actually, just starting this week, I'm meeting clients out of an event stylist's office. So it's not a studio, it's like an office, but I don't have a shooting space. So I immediately was like, oh, it's not really what I do. Like I can do it because I do that for weddings. It's not really what I do. So I went on our local group and I was like, does anybody want this referral? I know I already have the contract, but I'd rather give her someone who has the studio and is totally set up for it.
Right.
Nobody wanted it. It was like 18 people inside. Nobody wanted it. So I went back to her and I was like, okay, I'm going to call some places. So I called actually like wedding venues that I'd worked with. It was a Monday afternoon. So said, can we rent it for an hour? I gave her 3 different options. And I said, this one's going to be kind of darker. That is what it is. This one's brighter. You could do this one, this one, this one. And she actually picked kind of the darker one. And so on the day of the photos, it was a really dark day. There was like very little natural light. It was kind of like brick and dark. not really the normal style that you would see on my website. And I
Right.
had to light everything. So it was like off camera lighting. So it was like technically fine, but it wasn't like the kind of photo that you would look at and be like blown away because it
Sure.
has this beautiful light coming in and amazing. And even my husband looked at them and he's like, yeah, it's not like your typical style. Like it's not something you would normally put in your portfolio because it's just not your normal style. And so then I was like, oh, are they going to hate them? Like, just what are they going to do? And I sent them to them. So they were all from all over the country. And I sent them, I used to do in-person sales. Now I have this kind of like not in-person sales model where they have an ordering session, but it's virtual. And so I sent them, they were all together on Christmas Eve. So I got them done within like 5 days, sent them over, and I heard nothing. And I was like, oh my God, they hated
They
that.
hate it. Oh, that's the worst.
But then I think literally just yesterday, I heard back from the point person and she's like, I'm so sorry. The holidays were so crazy. We were all together and now we're all like spread out across the country again. And I just wanted you to know that we absolutely love the photos and my mom cried and we want to make sure we still have time to order prints because we really love them.
Oh, wow.
So what this goes back to is that if a stranger saw those photos, they would not be blown away. They were just like fine, like they were a family in a fairly dark space with off-camera lighting coming in. It wasn't anything I would enter to win an award.
Mm-hmm.
But to that family, they saw more than just the photo. It was
Yeah.
the wine on the hill experience for them. So they remembered that A, I helped them find a space, and B, I prepared them. I gave them a style guide to help them with what to wear. They all came dressed really cute. I gave them ideas for what to do with the photos. On the day of the photo shoot, they're all in from all over the country, so they're remembering this great experience of being together. And instead of just having them smile the whole time and feel awkward, I interacted with them. I tried to remember everybody's name. I used interactive prompts, where they were all laughing so hard. And like, even at the end, they were hugging me and saying, this was so much fun. Like,
Aw.
these prompts were such a blast. And so they left, even before they saw the photos, they knew they were going to love them because the photos, no matter what they were going to be a memory of a really great time. And so when they saw them, and then they saw them as a slideshow. So it's to music and it's more emotional instead of just sending them as
Like a gallery.
a link. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the whole experience was there from beginning to end, from like the way they interacted with me from the first day to the very end. So again, it's that like wine on the hill experience. It's more than just a photo. It's more to them. It has more meaning. It tastes better because of the full experience. And so in the end, they loved the photos because of that full experience. And so you have to remember that yes, you have to know your technical ability. You have to be able to take a good photo. But once you get to the point where you know your technical basics, you can take a good technically sound photo, you can edit, you have, whatever style you need to, instead of then focusing on like, what other preset can I do or what other crazy thing I can do? Like, that's fine, but you need to first nail down the whole experience. You need to make sure that you can pose people in a way that feels really fun and natural so that they're leaving like, that was actually really fun, instead of like, oh, I feel awkward. Because even if you are the most amazing photographer in the world and you take the most beautiful photo in the world and it could win awards, but you showed up late to that photo shoot and you made the client feel awkward, and in your posing they were like, this doesn't feel natural. Someone else might think that's beautiful, but that client's not going to like that photo nearly as much as if you were super responsive, prepared them ahead of time, made them laugh, had a great time, related to them, all these things that you have to do. So you have to remember that it is human nature. Like, I teach a consumer behavior class now at Michigan State, and it is truly like, that is actually how the human mind works. We think that we're grading something, judging something just based on like the pure values of that product, but we're actually much more influenced by all those other external factors than we are by the actual product. So people are going to like a photo way more based on the full experience than based on the photo itself.
I totally believe that. Even in my own experience as a photographer, I've been to shoots where, say, the couple, they just weren't meshing with me as well as I had hoped. However, they were very friendly in front of the camera and they looked great. And when I look back to share those photos, I think like, this one wasn't so good. This one wasn't my best set of photos. But whenever I share them, they always seem to get, the most amount of interactions or praise from people. But I think that it's because it's not a bad photo. It's simply because I didn't connect with the couple as well as I could have with other couples, I suppose.
Right.
So
yeah, and they might feel that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's different. Like, you still need to have photos that are beautiful for the outside world because
course.
they weren't there. They don't have that experience and that context to go with it. But for the couple themselves, if you want them to like sing your praises from the rooftops and love that photo and share that photo and print that photo and put it in their home, they have to have an emotional connection to it. Like everything in my house, even if it's an imperfect photo, I have very imperfect photos framed in my house, but the moment was real, and that's what mattered.
So important. So important. Yeah. So what could you say to, or I guess let's put you back in the situation. So obviously that family had a bit of a scenario where they needed to change the venue. You needed to find a new place for them. You went out of your way to try to find somebody to help accommodate them. You couldn't, so you took it upon yourself to find a venue, to get them photos that they would be more comfortable in, especially with young kids not wanting to be out in the cold. If that obviously shows that you went above and beyond to deliver a great client experience. Let's say that doesn't happen. You go out, a couple says we want to do it outdoors, you go outdoors. Everything is smooth sailing. How do you still ensure that you deliver a great client experience?
There's still an experience from the beginning to the end. So from the time that they come to my website, the experience begins. And that's where I'm giving them tips from the beginning. A lot of my clients actually come from reading articles or tips that they found where they're like searching for other information and then they find me.
Oh, okay.
So from the very beginning, I'm a resource to them. So like they're looking for a venue related to such and such. And I've written a blog post about okay, example. This is kind of a tangent, but it's related. So I one week was talking to friends and I was like, I love small weddings. Like I had kind of a small destination wedding and I just love the smaller weddings and I want to shoot more of them. And they're like, well, you should write a blog post that's like the top 5 venues in the area for small weddings. And so I was like, done, do it. I'll do it. So I wrote a blog post, like the top 5 Lansing, because I'm in Lansing, Michigan, Lansing area, the top 5 like Lansing venues for a small intimate wedding. And I put it on Pinterest and I put it on the blog and, posted a couple different places. And a week later, I booked a wedding, a small wedding for number 1 venue that I had listed on that list. So they're finding me in these ways where they're like I actually have couples come to me because I do a lot about like locations and tips and things. And they'll come to me and be like, hey, I saw you wrote this article. I found you through Pinterest. Mm-hmm. And can you, we haven't even picked our venue yet, but what do you think about this one? And then we'll get back to you on the actual photos once we have a date because we don't know our date yet. Yeah. So a lot of them are finding me that way and they're getting resources from the very beginning. I'm getting when they inquire for a wedding, they get an automatic reply. It's very responsive that gives them hey, I'll get back to you and let you know if I'm available on that date. But in the meantime, here's some more advice that's really going to help you. And so I'm helping them write their timeline because nobody knows where to start on that.
Right. If you've never been married, I tell this to brides all the time. How are you expected to know what you're supposed to do? So that makes sense.
You don't know how long stuff takes. So I have this whole guide that walks them through everything. A guide on do you need a second photographer? So they feel like I'm a really big resource from the beginning. Or for a portrait, I just have, again, it's very responsive. I give them tips on what to wear. I mail out a style guide that helps them with what to wear, gives them advice on where to get their makeup done. It gives them, ideas of what they can put in their home. It gets them really inspired. With the brides, I talk about touch points. So I have an email series that goes out once a week for 13 weeks where it's answering all those questions that they either knew they had or they didn't know they had yet. And so when I'm meeting with them at the consultation, they'll be like, oh, well, what do we do if it rains? And I'm like, oh, funny, I actually have an email on that you'll get, but here's
just
the basics.
Just wait 8 weeks and you'll find out.
I'll be like, well, I'll tell you the basics, but funny enough, that's actually a really common question. So I have an email. They're like, oh, good. I'm not alone. Other people have those same questions. And then it's making a point to dress well. I learned that from the very first, the Andre who I worked with before. Dress well into my brand and look professional. And I can't believe how many times at weddings I've had people come up to me and say, you or me and my second photographer, you're doing such a great job. And I'm like, you haven't even seen my photos. Right. But it's because I'm dressed professionally. They see me working hard. I think, I swear, getting the hold fast to hold my 2 cameras, I got more compliments, not that I looked good, but that I was doing a great job when I bought that thing. Because they were like, this girl knows what she's doing. Right. So it's just it starts from the very first contact point and it goes all the way through. It's touch points where you're giving advice every step of the way. You're anticipating their questions based on frequently asked questions so that you're answering the questions even before they know they have them, or along, anything that they ask, you're very responsive with those things. You're setting expectations. With weddings, you're planning out everything down to like who's going to call out names at the family with the family list, down to literally like mom is not allowed to call out names and your wedding coordinator is not allowed to call out names because like I know that doesn't work. So they appreciate that because I'm going to set them up for success because I know from experience what works and what doesn't.
Right.
And then after the wedding, they get an email immediately the next day that's like, here's what's going to happen next, just as a reminder. They get a preview really quickly, and then they get the experience of getting to sit down together and see their photos for the first time as a slideshow. So it's a much more emotional experience. And I always tell them, I used to send the photos and they were just a gallery, and every bride would just email me back and be like, oh my gosh, I looked at these at work and I like stopped working all day and it was so fun. And then I'd be like, what about your husband? And they'd be like, yeah.
Oh yeah, right. He needs to see these too.
Right. And I like did the same thing. Like my photos came and I looked at half of them before I was like, oh, Jeff, yeah, wait, come on over. So I force them, sounds me, but I have them choose a date. No, I like do force them. So like it's not encouraged, they have to do it, but I guess I'm not there. I make them pick a date when they can both be together to see the photos. And sometimes people have delayed as much as like 2 weeks beyond the date when they would have otherwise seen the photos because they want to make a point to be together and be like very present. And so they're willing to do that. They're willing to wait if it makes for a better experience and it's not I have the photos ready. Mm-hmm. They're good to go, but they want just as much as I do. They want to have a good experience so they can sit back and have music and they're more emotionally tied to it. Just think about, when you can like pour a glass of wine and have music and
be under that tree with your best friends and have that wine experience. I
totally
get
full circle. Exactly.
Totally
instead of sitting at work and clicking through the photos, kind of like trying not to get caught not working, right?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, all of those are like really great tips, and I'm sure that your brides really appreciate everything that you do for them. But I want to ask, what were you doing before? Maybe you said that you had shot some portraits before, and you would show those off to brides. There's a lot of photographers who are listening to this right now who maybe they're just charging $100 for a portrait session or something. What's something that they can do to improve their client's experience?
I think you can...
Wait, real quick.
Yeah.
You said a lot of things about like educating the clients, right? And that makes sense. A lot of the things that you're sharing is helpful for the clients. Let's take it one step even further back and say that somebody's just getting into portrait photography and maybe they're not, they don't know everything about photography. What could go wrong?
Sure. Yeah, they don't know what advice to give because they haven't figured it out yet.
Exactly. What sorts of things can they do?
Well, I think that the very first thing you should focus on is your posing because that is so much a part of the client experience. And for me, I am a really big fan of kind of like I took like the Beloved class from Gesture Rocks years ago, and now like the Unposed Field Guide is a big thing. And so I think it's worth investing, like before you go and buy 100 presets again, I think it's worth investing in some posing courses or advice. And there's every kind of school of thought, and I am definitely in the school of thought of the kind of unposed. That's not totally the right terminology. Like you have to pose them in a way that they're going to face the camera in the right way, like they're going to look flattering, but using prompts and using motion to get them to feel comfortable, asking them questions that are going to get them to laugh. And I don't feel like I can't give those away because they're not mine to give, but I'll say that they've changed everything in my business. And like I already for years have been using these prompts, and I've made up my own prompts, and I'll just make them up on the fly sometimes, and some work really well and some I'm like, yeah, we'll use that one again. But I even like just bought the Unposed Field Guide because I just wanted some fresh prompts to be able to throw at people, because if I do their engagement photos, I want to use different prompts for their weddings. And it's just everything. I mean, we had the first session that I did after buying that set, like we laughed for an hour straight. I learned so much about the couple because it's asking them questions about like telling stories about themselves, and they're laughing and they're having fun. So I think if you take that approach, people love it. And so often, especially the guys are like, I'm really awkward. I'm not really excited about this. I'm being dragged along. And then like the biggest compliment I get is when the guy at the end is like, that was actually really fun. I didn't think it was going to be, and I had a great time. And it was like a date. It was really fun. So I think that even if you know nothing else and you have nothing to give in terms of tips, that you should get really good at like natural posing. And you can buy resources like, I sell my bride guide. You can buy like a lot of people sell templates. I've invested in that in the past when I didn't necessarily know like email templates that were things like how to prepare for a session, because I was like, I don't know what to tell them to wear.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. So finding things on Pinterest, links on Pinterest that you can send them to, like just create a Pinterest board of outfits that you like, that you can say, hey, I created a Pinterest board for you. Here's some ideas that will get you started. Just really basic things that don't take a lot of experience. You can kind of like learn. You can either buy templates or you can kind of get enough of a feel to be able to give enough advice. And then it is also little things like just keeping an eye out for those details for them, like looking at them and being like, hey, your hair's in your face, I'm going to help you. Or your shirt is crooked and I'm going to even it out. Like they're going to, oh, thank you. Thank you. I didn't notice that. So they feel confident in that, knowing that they look good.
Right. We've talked a lot about the unposed posing cards in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group, because it's one of those things that I think when you're first starting out in photography, you naturally just kind of start shooting landscapes because it requires no extra interaction like through anybody else, right? You don't have to get anybody together. You shoot landscapes and then you think, maybe I want to shoot like people. Maybe I want to photograph people. You have one session, you don't know how to pose, it's terrible, and then you're like, I'm never doing this again. But I also own the unposed cards, and like you said, I love them to death. And I had a very similar experience after my first session using them. It was just so much fun, and it just totally changed my photography completely, because now I wasn't focused about like, okay, let me think, okay, she's got to do this with her elbow and this, and now it's me learning more about them, and that really elevates that client experience. It all goes back to that client experience. Super
then you have
important.
Stories to tell and relate back to, and then when you're like posting it, you can post like something that's funny related to it, and you just learn so much about them. It's a really fun way to go about it. So
Absolutely.
I know my first session with a couple, it was my friends. I was like, please let me bring you around Chicago and take your photo. And everything was very romantic, because romantic is easy to be like, put your foreheads together and like, hug here. And it's fine. Like I still will do a little bit of that. But honestly, like 95% of the photos I take, I'm going for lighthearted and like smiling and laughing. That's the best thing I can get. And I found, having hired associates and bringing them onto my team, that's the number one feedback that I would get in the early days, was like, we really feel like we're a lighthearted couple. Like everybody has that, right? And we want to make sure that we're getting photos that reflect that we're lighthearted. We're posing like, a lot of people just don't feel like that's them. If it's like, you don't just like put your foreheads together on an everyday basis. And yes, you like, that's nice. Like you want to remember that love and that feeling and that connection, but you also really want to remember the laughter, and you have to have a way to bring that out of people. And I like it to be real, instead of just saying, okay, laugh, ha, 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 ha. I like it to be real, where they are like, you can just tell when they are legitimately laughing. And going back to the experience, they remember that they were laughing instead of faking it. If they look at a photo and they're fake laughing, they know they're fake laughing. Mm-hmm. So they like will always look at it and be like, oh yeah, it's my fake laugh. But if they're laughing for real, they're like, oh my gosh, remember when like he said this and she said this.
I know I love to ask wedding and portrait photographers this question. This is my favorite question to ask. Obviously you focus a lot on client experience. It's probably the number one thing that I think that you really strive for, right? Obviously great pictures, and then client experience. Have you ever been to a wedding or a portrait session where you've had like a really embarrassing moment that you potentially learned something from, and how did you work your way out of it?
I don't know if there's ever been anything that's like over the top embarrassing, but it's probably all those little, like I said, those little pain points, like something goes wrong and I feel like, well, like, okay, here's one example that happened kind of after the wedding. I was still like going back and forth to Chicago. So I photographed a wedding in Chicago, and the mother of the groom emailed me a really angry email after the wedding. And she was very mad at me. And she said, you hardly took any photos of me. And I went back and I was like, oh, well, I took 65 photos of you. Here you go. I've put together a special gallery of your photos. And she wrote back and she's like, well, I don't like any of them. I don't like the angle. These are from the side and from this angle. I just don't like myself in them. So you didn't take enough. And then what did I learn from that experience? I learned that at the end of every wedding, I need to go up to all the parents and I need to say, hey, did you get everything you want? Do you want me to take any more photos with you with anybody else? And sometimes they'll be like, no, we're good, thank you. but I appreciate that. And sometimes they'll be like, oh, yes, like they're so excited. And they're like, come with me. And they'll bring me along and they'll take photos with their friends. And they're happy because you know what? I will never get that email again because I have asked and I've ensured that I am getting the photos that they want. So that was like a major pain point. I was like, it's horrible to get an email like that, even if I felt like it wasn't like I felt like I had taken plenty of her, but she didn't. It's all about, expectations. So I found a way to make sure that I'm not going to experience that again. And they're not going to experience that again because I'm going to say to the bride, the groom, and all the parents, did I get everything that you wanted? Are there any other photos you want with anybody else that you want to remember being with today?
I love it. That's a great tip and something that I think possibly gets overlooked quite often. Maybe photographers just think that it's just the couple that they're working for and who cares about the parents. But
yeah, and especially when the parents, they're a lot of times they're paying for it. Yep. And so they want to know that they have nice photos of themselves too. That's really important to care about the parents too.
For sure. Well, Allie, you have came on and you've shared a ton of great information today, and I really appreciate your time for sure. Can you tell the listeners where they can find out more about you and the Photo Field Notes podcast?
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, so I just set up the Photo Field Notes podcast on Instagram, finally split it out. So it's at Photo Field Notes on Instagram, and then photofieldnotes.com you can listen to. It's kind of a similar format to this, like interviews, and then a mix of just me telling random stories or advice or things that people have asked me. And then I'm also on Instagram as at Allie Siarto. So it's ALLIESIARTO. And then my website is also alliesiarto.com. And that's my wedding and portrait photography website.
Awesome. Well, Allie, again, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate everything that you shared. And I look forward to keeping up with you and following you on Instagram in the future.
Sure thing. Thanks, Raymond.
Of course. What a ball of energy Allie was. Man, I feel like we could have talked forever about everything. I had so many questions lined up. I write up some questions for each episode just so that I kind of keep us on track. I have an idea of where I want to take each interview, I suppose. But if it doesn't go there, I'm not worried about it, right? I'd be more than happy to hear the guests talk about what it is that they're passionate about, interested in, and an expert in, rather than if I just have questions that are kind of off topic. So with this interview, I barely used any of the questions that I had. I started my introduction, we started talking, it went off, we kind of rabbit trailed down some places, we had a great conversation, and then at the end I was like, oh my gosh, this has been a long interview, we really need to wrap this thing up. I don't want to hold her for too long. She's a very busy photographer. So tell me what you got out of that interview. I would really, really, really love to hear it. I have invited Allie to join the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. So if you have any questions for Allie, feel free to head over to the group. And if you're not part of the group, head over to the main page, facebook.com/Beginner Photography Podcast. Click the link, and then you can join the group. And feel free to ask her any questions. I'm sure that she would be more than happy to help. And again, if you're listening to this, Allie, geez, thank you. Honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on and sharing everything that you did. I know that after the interview, you said that you were kind of worried that you were just sharing stories that weren't too photography related and that they weren't going to relate with some of the listeners, but I think that you're absolutely wrong. The bigger picture here was delivering that better experience is really going to make you stand out and be memorable. So again, Allie, thank you for everything. And if you're listening and you want to know more about Allie, check out the Photo Field Notes podcast. It's a really good podcast. She interviews other photographers and people related to growing businesses or keeping you on track, or business coaches, things like that, right? Like things that are important once you get past the ideology of what makes a good photo. So again, head over to Photo Field Notes podcast website, and while you're there, check out her course for the 3 key steps to a 6-figure wedding photography business. You're not going to be disappointed. All right, that is it for this week's episode. Guys, I will see you again next week. I love you all. Go out there, keep shooting, have fun, stay safe, and I will see you later.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. Be sure to join the conversations on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want any links or resources we talked about in today's episode, check out the show notes at beginnerphotographypodcast.com. See you again next week.